Welcome to Bible Memory Gold. My name's Josh. This is my friend, Dr. Larry Dinkins. Today, we are going through the outline of 2 Corinthians. If you want to download what we've got here for you, you can go to BibleMemoryGold.com/outlines, and we are going to walk through all of that together right now. But before we do that, I wanted to explain the fact that we're doing this very systematically and for a reason. The book of John, we used numbers turned into images to show you how you can take and use images in different shapes in order to memorize the outline of a book. In Hebrews, we used a mind palace, and we used the tabernacle. So you could walk through the tabernacle, you could learn a little bit about the tabernacle at the same time if you didn't know, but then use that as a mind palace for all 13 chapters of Hebrews. This week, we are going to be doing 2 Corinthians using a rhyming scheme. And so you can understand how you can look at numbers and rhymes and use that to create images, and that's what we're going to do here. So before we dive into all of these images, Dr. Dinkins, can you share with us the way that you rhyme 1 through 13 and why we stop at the number 13?
Yes, right. What's interesting is I've been doing this with Thai people, so this rhyming scheme with the interest in English actually will go cross-language, which is a goal of ours too. We'd like all of these, if possible, to be used because we probably have people on that are from different language groups. So,
that's true.
Yeah. So just think about when you're a child, you probably did something like this with rhyming, 1 sun, 2 shoe, 3 tree, 4 door, 5 hive.
As in like a beehive?
Like a beehive.
Yeah.
And you had alternatives on that, but we used a hive. 6 stick or sticks.
Yep.
7 heaven. 8 gate. 9 vine. And this is hard in Thai because they don't have a V.
Oh, okay.
So they say wine.
Oh, nice.
So 9 vine. 10 cup. And then we're getting into the ones a little bit more difficult. 11 is going to be 7-Eleven, which is a store, a convenience store.
Yeah, you've probably heard of 7-Elevens before. They used to be more popular in the past in the U.S., but they're coming back up.
9,000 of them in the States.
That's right.
And there's 14-something here in Thailand.
It is super popular here in Thailand, 7-Eleven. So that's for 11.
Right. And 12, we do a dozen eggs. Now, it's interesting. Some cultures don't have a dozen when they sell their eggs, but we're working off a dozen eggs because we're used to that.
Exactly.
Yeah, and 13 is difficult because we're just using the word teen, and we think of a teenager, 13 with a teenager.
Yeah, and you could, find another rhyming word with teen if you wanted to. The reason why this works well with 2 Corinthians is because once you move beyond 13, everything rhymes with teen, right? Or like 14, 15, 16. And so that's the limitations of using the rhyming, and it's why we're kind of keeping it with a 13 chapter book. But hopefully, as you think about it, it's like, okay, 2, shoe, 5, hive. Like we're trying to create those really easy rhymes that will be quick to learn, okay? So we're going to go ahead and dive in here with 2 Corinthians, and the first one, if you remember 1, what's the rhyme with 1?
1 is sun.
1 is sun. 1 is sun. So we have sun and the first chapter of 2 Corinthians with a theme of the God of all comfort.
Yes, and when it's very cold, we have maybe an extra layer on our bed, and so I just thought immediately of a comforter. Now in Thailand, you don't use a comforter because it's so hot.
We're so hot.
Right. But we've got the sun underneath a comforter, and particularly God comforts us during our suffering and our trials, the problems we face.
Exactly. And if you need to, a lot of times when it comes to these kind of images, the more fantastic you can make it, the better. So if you think about this sun, like catching the comforter even on fire, if that helps you remember this. But you have 1 sun, and the theme for that chapter then is comfort and comforter.
And there are more things in that chapter than just comfort.
Of course.
And that's going to be true all through this. We've just picked out something that was more visual, more graphic to really help kind of seal the association.
That's a great point. There are so many places where these chapters actually have multiple themes. We are choosing one of them. And and I've done this before in the past, you want to add a theme, like there's something else in chapter 1 that you really want to remember, it is possible to take and add that to the image yourself. right? And decide, okay, I want to add another image in here that helps me remember that particular theme.
And Josh, that's what we did with chapter 6 of John.
Yeah.
As I think when we first started out, we had a 6 walking on water.
Yeah.
And we began to think, oh, there's a very important theme that we're missing.
Yes.
And so we put that bread aspect.
Yeah. We'll also see this in chapter 4 of 2 Corinthians, where I added something to something that Dr. Dinkins had given to me because it was important to me. And I'll show you what that is in a second. But we have 1 and Son, 2 shoe. And what do we have here, Dr. Dinkins?
Yes. 2 shoe. Well, we need a connection with a cross-reference to chapter 5 of 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians, as you know, that was a difficult church to work with. Mm-hmm. And there was a man that was sleeping evidently with his stepmother. And Paul was going to work very strongly with him, and he was going to hand him over to Satan for his soul would be saved, but he would actually be under a judgment. And what's great when you get to 2 Corinthians, he actually repents. And so they're to take him back and to forgive him and to restore him. So that's a theme that we have here with shoe, is a restoration. And in Thailand, they have a lot of little shops that actually repair shoes. But in America, I think you just buy new shoes.
Yeah, exactly.
But here you're going to repair your shoes. So that's what I'm thinking here.
So if you see here, we're actually looking at 4 shoes, for me, that are bowed as if they're gifts. So to me, that's kind of the forgive. And then if you see that all of them are patched up, and that to me is kind of a representation of the restoration. So Paul is asking the church in Corinth to forgive and restore this gentleman into their community.
Yeah.
All right, that is chapter 2 that rhymes with shoe. Now we're moving on to 3, and if you remember, 3 rhymes with tree.
Tree. Well, this was particularly a good one for you. I think you should explain this one.
Yeah, I really loved, chapter 3 was a lot of fun. It's really a great read for me. I love this idea of the law written on your heart, right? So we have old in the tombstone. It's really kind of, they talk about tablets, the stone tablets in chapter 3, referring to the old covenant and how the new covenant is written by the Spirit, not on tablets, but on our hearts. Yeah. And it also, I love at the very latter half of the chapter, it starts talking about how when Moses experienced God's glory, his face shone, and how the glory that is given to us is the same that caused Moses' face to shine. And that's why I asked, to create this image where there was actually shining coming out from that heart, because we are that light through which God, expresses his glory. So, yeah.
And I'd like everyone to recognize this is the power of AI. I think this is something we're going to expand upon. Josh is working on actually a presentation that would help us be able to actually memorize better by using the power of AI.
Yep. So we have chapter 3, tree. You can see the old covenant, and then we have the new covenant of our heart. So that is chapter 3. 4. What does 4 rhyme with? Door. Why don't you walk us through door?
4 door. Now, the God of this age has blinded the eyes of the unbelieving, that they might not see the glory as you see the light and the glory of God. And so see a blind person walking up to a door and the amazing light of God shining through. And that's the main association I get from that. I memorized that verse. It's chapter 4 and verse 4. Mm-hmm. And I've thought about that often working here in Thailand.
Yeah, exactly. So in this chapter, it talks about the light doing 2 things. It either blinds those who are unbelievers, or it gives those who know God a knowledge of his glory.
Right. And these clay vessels, as you go farther after verse 4, that was something you added that I didn't have in my...
Yeah. Well, so I'm a product of, the 90s church, with DC Talk, Jars of Clay, these type of bands. And one of my favorite songs, I can still hear it in my head, is "We have this treasure in," or they call it earthen vessels, or their name from the band Jars of Clay. So for me, I thought it was really cool, and I'm always now going to remember, Jars of Clay, that verse is in chapter 4 of 2 Corinthians. So again, this is something that Dr. Dinkins didn't necessarily have. It wasn't as maybe important to him as it was to me, but it was something that I decided, wow, I really want to remember this. So I'm going to add a jar that has been knocked over by a guy who's, walking through with his, covering his eyes from being blind. So just an example of using other images in these.
Right, and my philosophy to go through it the first time is just to have one association. It's
Yes.
hard enough to remember one.
Yeah.
And on John, I actually have two things, and maybe in the future we can add,
Sure.
as we have done in this picture, a couple of really good, solid associations from every chapter would be a good goal to have.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to make sure that you're getting at least that one solid theme, and then if you can remember that, then you can add other things around it.
And I can say, I go to themes that are more visual. Sometimes there's a different theme in the chapter.
Yeah.
But the one that's more graphic and visual is the one
the
I
one
gravitate to.
That makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. All right. So 5, this is an interesting one. Chapter 5 rhymes with hive, and we have beehive. So we're looking here at the judgment seat of Christ. Can you
It's called
walk
the
through?
Bema seat. It's sort of like at the Olympics, you have those 3 levels.
Yeah.
And this is a picture of the fact that all of us will be judged, not our sin, but what we have done in the body here on earth. And the way I see it, the things we've done in the Holy Spirit, we get a reward. The things we've done in the flesh could be hay, wood, and stubble.
Yeah.
So instead of, I'm thinking of a crown because the focus of reward, but I see it as a hive, 5 hive, and then that is placed on the person's head.
Yeah, so you can imagine, and maybe I could have created this image a little bit better, that this man is standing before the judgment seat, and he is being this crown of hives is being put on his head. One of the things I really like, I got a crack at it, or just really thought it was funny reading through chapter 5 again, was how Paul is just very open about talking about how most of us who are getting older in age groan in these bodies that we have and really look forward to our heavenly bodies to be at home with the Lord. But until then, live by faith and not by sight. That's from verse 7 of chapter 5.
Right, and the groaning could be, I think it's good to add these bees.
Yeah.
Because he may be groaning because of all the bees swirling around.
There you go.
That's an added element to the picture.
Yep. All right, let's continue on. Chapter 6. If you remember what rhymes with 6, you have sticks. At least this is what we have decided to do. And so we talk about, or this chapter talks about in the second half, not being yoked with unbelievers, right? Yoked being something, an image of 2 oxen that are plowing the field. And so I tried my best with AI images to just create they're yoked with sticks as opposed to big logs or beams or something like that. So you've got a lot of sticks. And the key verse being chapter 6, verse 14.
One thing you could do is, in your mind, you could make a donkey with an ox, because maybe a small donkey with a big ox, because that's an unequally yoked, and that could be leaning. The yoke could be at an angle.
Yeah.
Because they're not really pulling together.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. So there's a lot that we could dive into on this chapter, but we'll just continue on. We have 6 sticks. Chapter 7.
Excuse me, should we review?
You want to review real
Because
quick?
they've just heard the rhymes very recently. 1 sun,
1 sun,
2 shoe,
2 shoe,
3 tree, 4 door, 5 hive, and now we have 6 sticks. And I encourage you, you want to be able to review and get those rhymes down first, then you add the associations.
Exactly. Okay, and so now we're moving on to 7, which rhymes with
Heaven.
heaven. That's right. And so we created an image where we've got Paul up here in heaven. Just imagine for a moment looking down at the church in Corinth, even though that's not technically Corinth, but we'll go with it for a moment. And in this chapter, Paul talks about how much pride and joy he takes in this church, because you were talking about that first letter was pretty harsh to the Corinthians. And he acknowledges that in the chapter. He says, I know that what I wrote to you before caused a little bit of pain and it was hard, but I'm thankful that it led to your repentance. So it was obvious that he sent that first letter and it was hard, but they reacted well to that letter, and that is what makes Paul just so proud and filled with joy as he looks down on the church.
Right. Well, Paul, he always had a burden for all the churches that he planted. And at one point he wondered whether he would have pride in his church. That's a very important point from that chapter.
Exactly. All right, so we have 7 heaven. We're trying to make our way through these as quickly as we can so that we can review at the very end. Now when we move on to chapter 8. 8 rhymes with
Gate.
gate.
And we've got a couple of chapters that are going to be speaking about giving. This was something important to Paul with the Corinthian church. And so gate, we see we're going to use the word give generously.
And so you see here we've got a gate that has a pile of money just bursting through that gate because Paul is asking this church to give generously. He uses an example of the Macedonian church and how generous they were and says, hey, I want you to follow their example. All right, and it's important, I think, as we see this, you've got gate with give generously and the money here. The reason why it's important to kind of remember give generously is because he continues this theme of giving in chapter 9. That's right.
And 9 is a vine.
A vine.
And however you discern a vine, it might be different types of vines, obviously, but we're on the topic of generosity. And for this one, I like the word give cheerfully. I think the word is hilariously.
Really?
And I'm in a church, I'm not sure everyone is real hilarious when the offering plate goes by.
Yes, yeah. So again, in chapter 8, we've got give generously. And here in chapter 9, Paul talks about giving. Now make sure that when you do give generously, you give cheerful. And he even mentions, he says, giving cheerfully produces a thankfulness to God. And so that was something that for me kind of stood out. If you just want to remember give cheerfully, that's awesome. But I've got this idea of money, that giving being the foundation or the roots of this vine that then produce you can maybe put happy faces if you wanted to have cheerful as something that you remember, or I don't know if you can tell, but these are thankful hands, that emoji. So giving cheerfully. And if there's a verse that you want to really pull out or memorize, the key verse here is 2 Corinthians 9:7. And just pause here for a moment. If you wanted to, that download that I mentioned at BibleMemoryGold.com/outlines, each of those downloads includes a spreadsheet that talks about the image. It talks about how that image relates to the theme of that chapter, but it also has a key verse, which I think is important. I think, it would be really cool if you could have at least just one verse memorized for every single chapter, and you can choose whatever you want, but this is the key verse that we've pulled out, and then you can do whatever you want with that.
Well, I've done 1,189.
Yeah.
Different chapters, and on the epistles, that's something I would highly encourage you to do, is to think of a key verse from each of the chapters. That lends itself particularly in the letters and the epistles, because sometimes that's very kind of doctrinal issues, and it's easier to just pin it down with a good key verse.
Yeah. All right. Let's continue on. We only have 3 chapters left, 10, 11, 12, no, 13. So 4 chapters left. I don't know my numbers here. So chapter 10, this is the last one that we've got that's rhyming here. And 10
is a tin cup.
A tin cup. And so we've got, imagine the story of Joshua where you've got somebody blowing their trumpet and you've got these stronghold walls. There's a reason why I'm using that term, but the walls that are strongholds that are falling into this tin cup. And why do we have that?
Well, our weapons are not carnal, but they are powerful for the pulling down of strongholds. So there's a lot of spiritual warfare in chapter 10. And I think that fits very well with what was happening going around the walls of Jericho. Yeah,
exactly. And it is in this chapter, starting here and moving into chapter 11 as well, where Paul begins to defend his apostleship. And you'll see this against those who seek to compare him with others or his ministry with other ministries. And so he is having to explain how why his message is worth listening to. Yeah. So, all right, chapter 10, the tin cup. And let's
stop and go back real quick.
Okay. One sun.
2 shoe.
Yeah.
3 tree. 4 door. 5 hive. 6 sticks. 7 heaven. 8 gate. 9 vine. 10 tin cup.
10 tin cup.
And I actually put a holder onto that, because a tin cup reminds me of someone begging.
Yeah.
That's the sort of cup you use when you're begging. Right?
Okay, there you go. So now we move into words that don't necessarily rhyme, because 11 and 7 are actually rhyming. So it's better to just try something. And there's a number of different things you could do. We chose 7-Eleven.
7-Eleven, which is, we probably go to that every other day to buy something here in Thailand.
Yep. So you can see a man kind of representing Paul who's being held up at gunpoint in a 7-Eleven. He's having to defend himself. Again, I talked about how in chapter 9, he's starting this process, and then it goes chapter 10, he starts that process. And then into chapter 11, he's full force defending himself
Yeah, he's a true apostle. Now, he wasn't part of the original 12, and so he came late in life, as he said. And he, in that chapter, is pretty bold to describe all the things that prove that he is a true apostle.
Yeah, and he talks very specifically about how the early church had to deal with false apostles, deceitful workers, and those masquerading as apostles of Christ, as it says in verse 13.
So that's your robber there.
So there you got a mask and somebody masquerading, exactly.
Okay.
So that's chapter 11 that takes place in a 7-11, and Paul defends his apostleship. Let's move into 12, and if you remember, we're not necessarily rhyming with 12. It is 12 as in a dozen eggs. All right? So imagine, and this was hard for me to do with the image, maybe when you get this later, you'll see that we've got an egg missing or we've altered the image in some way.
Yeah.
But imagine that the hand is picking up one of the eggs out of the dozen, and why would it be picking it up?
Yes. Well, in that chapter, he actually goes up to the third heaven. He sees things that no man has ever seen, and the tendency would be to be very proud. And so a thorn in the flesh was given. We don't know what that thorn is. Mm-hmm. And so those two images, I think, are very strong for me, is an egg going up maybe to the third heaven, and then as he comes down, this thorn is placed there in order to humble him.
Yeah. So it is, if you read through chapter 12, and again, Dr. Dinkins and I were talking before we got started, one of our hopes and prayers for this time is not just that you'll memorize the outline of 2 Corinthians, but that it'll spur you on to want to reread it and to dive in. And chapter 12, where he talks about this vision that he had and the thorn in the flesh, it's just really fascinating, the way he talks about that. So it's definitely worth looking into. But we have him being drawn up, hence the vision, and that's where we get this egg being pulled up, and then you can see the thorns that are in the flesh of the hand that is pulling up that egg. Mm-hmm. So that is chapter 12. We're one more away, and then we'll do some review here. Chapter 13, 13 being for what?
Yeah. 13 is just the word teen. And
teen.
As you said, we go through all the teens, 14, 15s. So we're pretty well at this point stuck as far as rhyming.
Yep.
And that one is examine yourself to see if you are in the faith. Mm-hmm. So kind of at the end of this book, he's having them to step back and to evaluate where they are with the Lord and in their walk with him.
Exactly. So this is the conclusion of 2 Corinthians, and this is his exhortation, what he asked. What at the end of the day, this is my call to action for you, is to examine yourself. It even uses, at least in the NIV, to test yourself. And so what we have is we have a teenager sweating over an exam that he's having to take. So if you can recall, your teenage years sitting in a high school classroom, just having to take an exam that you didn't want to take, that is how we're connecting teen with examine yourself or test yourself. So both of these right here, and then you can see that in 2 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 5 through 6, if you wanted to.
But Josh, you never were nervous in a test, were
Oh,
you?
never. Actually, the funny thing is I was a very good test taker, and I almost wish I hadn't been because I didn't study as well because I was a good test taker. Yeah. Whereas my wife, she wasn't a great test taker, but she would have to study. And so I think she actually learned her material a lot better than I did.
Right. You're a good crammer.
I'm a good crammer, exactly. Yeah. All right, so again, that is all 13 chapters of 2 Corinthians, and if you want to download that free kind of PDF that has all of these images and a spreadsheet that explains all these different stories, you can go to BibleMemoryGold.com/outlines, and you'll find that there for 2 Corinthians, along with a couple other books that we've done. So let's go ahead and review real quick.
And let me just encourage everybody, at the beginning you want to do strong review.
Yes.
And then we've also talked about spaced repetition in the future, but my high encouragement is grab hold of this now. Print this out, work on it here in the first few days, and you will get ownership over 2 Corinthians, at least in an outline form.
Yeah, and I would also encourage you, if you have kids, this is something I want to do with my two boys, is this type of visual and rhyming, this really activates the imagination of kids. Yes. And you'd be surprised at how much they would get into this with you, especially if you were quizzing them in the morning over breakfast, which I'll do right now. So I want you to think for a moment, all right? And we're going to do this in two parts. I'm going to give you a chapter number, and the first thing I want you to think of is what is the rhyme, because that's the important part. If you can't remember the rhyme, then everything else kind of falls out the window. Right. So first think of the rhyme, and then see if you can attach that to the image and what the theme for that chapter is. So I'm going to start with chapter 4. Chapter 4, what is the rhyme with chapter 4? If you want to, you can put that in the comments here. I see that this, we've gotten a lot of people saying this is helpful. Thank you, Leah, for being here. Wonderful, says Deb. Thank you, says Rosanna. I'm glad that this has been helpful so far. The rhyme with for is?
Door.
Door, okay? So what was the image that we used for door? Do you recall? I know that for us, the comments come in about on a 20-second lag time, so it makes it a little bit difficult. There we go. We've got Aaron who said door. Thank you very much, Aaron. Deb says door. Awesome. So you guys are obviously getting the rhyme here. If you recall, the door had light just emanating and a guy who was blinded by that light. And then I added some jars of clay that were at his feet. So
Broken.
yeah. So the theme of that was God's light either blinds those who don't believe or gives us the knowledge of God's glory for those who do believe.
And that light is within these earthen vessels.
Within these earthen
fragile.
vessels. Exactly. Okay, that was good. So we've got chapter 4. Let's see. So we have door. Person. Sue says person blinded by a light coming through the door with a broken pot at the side. See? That's awesome. It's amazing how these images can stick in your head, isn't it? All right, let's try another one. 8. 8 is a good one. That's a fun. So if you've got 8, what was the rhyme with 8? I'll give you a moment to type it into the comments so that at least we've got record of the fact.
And those words are very close. I find when I taught the Thai, they picked up a number of these because the words are very close.
Yep. So the rhyme with 8 is gate. There we go. Deb said it right there. 8, gate. And I think of the iron gate. So if you've got that image of the iron gate, what was the theme of 2 Corinthians chapter 8? Money. Okay. We've got money here. Yeah, there's actually chapter 8 and chapter 9 are both a little bit about money. So specifically, when we look at chapter 8, what was he asking for? Okay. Give generously. Teresa, well done. Teresa Marshall, good job. So chapter 8 of 2 Corinthians is give generously. All right, let's do 2 more, and then we'll go on from here. How about we'll do chapter 11? 11. You guys think about 11.
11.
And think about it carefully because don't want to get it mixed up with 7, which is where we have the rhyme. So where we have 11, what is the image that we're trying to have come up in our heads? Go ahead and type that into the comments, and I'll go ahead and say it now. Hopefully they'll start showing up here, but it's the convenience store, 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven, which strangely, one of the things that I thought was most funny coming here to Thailand is that you can have a 7-Eleven on one side of the road and then a 7-Eleven on the other side of the road.
100 yards down the road.
And somehow both of them stay in business. I'm not sure how it works.
14,000 of these 7-Elevens in this country.
That's crazy. So chapter 11 of 2 Corinthians, we have 7-Eleven. And what is the theme of chapter 11 in 2 Corinthians? Oh, we've already got somebody pulling it. Paul defends his apostleship, says Sue and Deb and MLL and Teresa. That's awesome. You guys are getting this. I love it. So that is chapter 11 where Paul is defending his apostleship from people who are false apostles.
And then detracting from his position as a real apostle.
Correct, yeah. And is it that chapter where he talks about he actually goes through and says, I was whipped this many times.
Yeah, he's shipwrecked, he's scourged, he's beaten with rods.
Yeah.
He's been in dangers, in the city and in the rural area. So he makes a long litany, kind of a list to prove he's more of an apostle than many of the other ones probably.
Yeah, no. And if that's something that's important to you, I could even imagine, just putting a list in Paul's hand, like a shopping list at a 7-Eleven where he's listing out all the different ways that he has suffered for Christ.
Yeah, I actually use a counter, the long counter in a 7-Eleven, and I put some of those dangerous things that he encountered along. So he's checking out.
He's checking out and buying all these things.
Yeah.
Interesting. See, there's just so many fun ways. This is what I love about using these visual aids for memory is that you can really be creative and have a lot of fun with it. Okay, one more we will do. Let's see, chapter 2. Chapter 2. What is the rhyme for chapter 2? See if you can type that into the comment section right now as you're watching this. Even if you're watching it afterwards and this is not live, go ahead and type it in because I think it helps your memory to be able to just physically type that in. So what is chapter 2? Jody says he forgot what 9 is. 9. Do you guys remember what I'll plug that in there for 2, so plug that in as well.
We'll go back to 9.
We'll go back to 9. So 2, as Deb said, is shoe. And if you recall, there's 4 shoes in a window that have bows and they're all patched up. So why is that? Why do we have 4 shoes with a present bow and they're all patched up? What is the theme here? Oh, great. Aggie is the shoe. Wayne put shoe. Good. We've got a lot of people that can remember 2 is shoe. But what is the theme of 2 Corinthians chapter 2? I'll go ahead and say it. Again, I wish they would come a little bit faster. But the theme of chapter 2 is forgive and restore, right? This hearkening back to 1 Corinthians chapter 5 for the gentleman that was kind of that was doing some things that was getting him at odds with the community. And so Paul is asking them to restore him.
And I'd like to just encourage you too, when you work on numerous books, for me, I've already done 1 Corinthians with golf course.
Oh, really?
And so immediately when 1 Corinthians 5 is mentioned, I go to hole number 5 at a course I know, and I see that picture of a man with his stepmother, and that is graphic enough. And immediately when it's mentioned here in 2 Corinthians, I can make the connection. So the more books that you can do in outline form, you can make really good cross-references, and you can make the Bible make more sense.
Yeah.
Because the Bible fits together. It's like a puzzle for many people, just spread out on a table.
Yeah.
But there are ways to make it really fit together.
Yeah. And I think, if you watched my most recent video last week where I talked about the value of memory and creating those connections, I think that happens all the time for me when I'm listening to a sermon. Or I was even telling you about how we were talking about Moses during Sunday, or during our church on Sunday, and the first thing that popped in my head was Hebrews chapter 3. So Jesus is better than Moses. And making those connections, I think, is one of the most fun aspects for me of memorizing even outlines, but also individual verses and word for word scripture, is just being able to make those connections.
And for me, that connection has gone up to 100,000 hits.
Oh, yeah.
Because the early video that we did on the 1,189 has gone up to that level, and that's really surprised me, because I have videos that stay at 100.
Yeah.
And that one really went strong.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Okay, let's go back to number 9, because we had Jody who's asking about number 9. So
9 is vine.
Vine, that's right. So we had 8, gate, which was talking about giving generously. But 9, the vine, we saw the cross section of that vine. And what was the difference between give generously and chapter 9? Does anybody remember? All right, I'll go ahead and say it right here, was to give cheerfully.
Yes.
Give cheerfully. That produces thankfulness to God. And so we had that there. Let's see if I can pull it up. Oh, there we go. So this is chapter 9 on the vine. And then chapter 8 was the gate for giving generously.
So can you say, how do you strengthen, if you have a weak point, how do you strengthen those so that you don't lose them?
Yeah, so let's say Jody is fantastic at doing this stuff, so I'm sure that all it takes is just one more review for him. But let's say you find that you cannot remember vine and this money. You can alter the image in a way that is crazy enough or fantastic enough that it sticks in your brain. So let's say for some reason you cannot remember this, then maybe you imagine yourself holding money in the vine like a boa constrictor is just wrapping itself around your arm. Like that action and that interaction between the theme of giving, so holding that money, and the rhyming word, doing something that is action-oriented and generally crazy, right? Something that is just out of the normal. Those are the type of things that help images really stick in our brains.
Yeah, and you can see these as seeds, and then they're sprouting, and the more movement you give to your image, and these all popping up, that might seal it to your mind.
Exactly. Well, thank you all for joining us for this. We're about done here. I do want to say one more time as I make it through here that if you wanted to download all of these, they are free. The images along with the descriptions of why we have the different themes for these images. So that's BibleMemoryGold.com/outlines. We hope that you're welcome to share that with anybody, print them off, do whatever you like. We just want you to be able to memorize the outline of 2 Corinthians and, like we said, hopefully inspire you to read through 2 Corinthians again and maybe memorize some of the verses there.